Θέλω να σας ευχαριστήσω που με καλέσετε εδώ, ενώ με την βοήθεια του Θεού έμαθα την ελληνική γλώσσα στην Θεσσαλονίκη, για μένα τουλάχιστον η καλύτερη πόλη στην Ελλάδα. Θα μιλήσω όμως στα αγγλικά, επειδή μπορεί και νομίζω ότι υπάρχει κάποιοι μαζί μας που δεν καταλαβαίνουν ελληνικά. Και γι' αυτό το θέμα μας είναι στην Gerontissa Macrina, όπως είπε ο Σοφοκλής, και είναι για μένα πολύ, σημαντικό, επειδή μας έχουν βοηθήσει πάρα πολύ το μοναστήρι του Γέροντα Φρέμ και η Gerontissa Macrina ήταν το πνευματικό του παιδί κάπως, επειδή ήταν του παππού Ιωσήφ πρώτα και μετά του Γέροντα Φρέμ. So, our topic tonight is the ever-memorable Macaristi, Abbess Macrina, a contemporary mother of the church. Gerontissa Macrina is a very special person, for not only did she have a great influence on the spiritual lives of many in Greece, but in North America as well. A good number of the women's monasteries under the spiritual direction of Elder Ephraim trace their roots to Gerontissa Macrina, since he took many nuns from her monastery to establish other monasteries. So if I could be so bold, I would say that just as Gérondissa Ephraim is the father of the revitalization of monasticism in North America, so Gerontissa Macrina is the mother of this revitalization. She is a mother for all Orthodox Christians, because she is, in every sense of the word, a mother of the church. She is a saint like the saints of old, wise in spiritual matters, reverent in every regard, and virtuous beyond compare. She is, in my humble opinion, an abbess like Saint Irini Christou Valandu and Saint Macrina, the sister of Saint Basil the Great. And for this reason, she's a mother for us all. While she lived, many great spiritual elders recognized her purity of heart and the grace of God that dwelt within her. Elder Iakovos Tsalikis, who lived in a monastery in Evia, used to say, if I lived in Volo, I would go every day on my feet with τα πόδια μου. I would walk every day to Gerontissa's monastery. I would kiss her hand and take her blessing, and then I would go to work. Once, Gerontissa met Elder Paisis of the Holy Mountain. She traveled to Halkidiki, which is just outside Thessaloniki, where Geronda was staying at a monastery. And when he saw her, both he and she did a prostration to each other, just like we see in Saint Zosiman and Saint Mary of Egypt. Elder from Katanakiotis also loved and respected her very much. When she went to visit him in a hospital once that he was staying at near her monastery in Athens, they asked his disciple, Gerontissa and the nuncia cometh, they asked his disciple to ask the elder if it was okay if they came to visit him, if they came into his room. And when he heard that Gerontissa Macrina had come, he said, open wide the doors. This is how much he loved her. And in fact, he had prayed to God, and God had given him Portaria. He had given him confirmation, divine confirmation, that Gerontissa occupied a very high spiritual state, that in fact, she was equal to Elder Joseph, Papu Yosef, the Hesychist, who we know was a very, very holy person. See, Gerontissa wasn't merely a mother for the nuns in Greece and in North America. She was a mother even to these saintly men. By looking at the life and teachings of Gerontissa Macrina, we want to stress the importance of monasticism. Because of the holy monasteries, we have spiritual giants such as Gerontissa Macrina. She, through monastic struggle, became a saint, and because she acquired holiness, thousands of people profit from her influence, the example of her selfless life. This is why the monasteries are important. They produce saints and teach us how to become saints in the world. There's a book about Gerontissa Macrina that was published last year. Her monastery published it. It's about her life and her teachings, and it's aptly called Logia Kardias, Words from the Heart. And her words not only come from the heart, but penetrate the heart as well. If you read her book, you'll see that just about every paragraph describes some miracle Gerontissa lived. At times I would read it and actually become discouraged. Gerontissa experienced many hardships, but she also experienced many states of grace. However, it is not the miracles she experienced and describes that make her a mother of the church. It was the little things that show us that she had acquired a high level of virtue, and this should encourage us also to struggle here in the world to emulate Gerontissa's uncompromising fight to attain holiness. Not so we can say that so-and-so saint visited us or healed us, appeared to us, we dreamt of this or that holy thing or had this spiritual experience, but so we can attract the grace of God and become God's by grace, as St. Athanasius the Great says. When we have Christ living in us like Gerontissa had, everything becomes light, everything easy, everything joyful. The greatest hardships in the world become means for us to commune with God. And instead of complaining, we praise him. Because hardships, tribulations, and difficulties, as we will see in the life of Gerontissa Macrina that we'll talk a little bit about, serve to help us seek and struggle to live a Christ-centered life. And it is about these things I wish to speak. For seeing visions and smelling divine fragrances are worthless if we don't strive every day to live for Christ so that he might live in us, transforming our darkness into light, our sadness into joy, and our tribulations into opportunities for spiritual victories. It was in the little ways that Gerontissa Macrina's virtue manifested itself, and it is in the little ways that we can emulate her. And with the help of God, root out our evil habits, root out our dissatisfactions with our children, our in-laws, our jobs, and ultimately become full of peace and joy. So Gerontissa Macrina's name in the world was Maria Vassoulopoulou. She was born in 1921 in the village of Hetzleri, which is in Asia Minor, in the western part. Her parents brought her to Greece during the exchange of population in 1922. She was very young, like a couple months old. They eventually settled in Nea Ionia in Volo, which is where she came to establish the monastery later, on a hill, just sort of outside of Volos, above Volos, overlooking Volos. By the young age of 9, she had lost both of her parents. Her father fell asleep first on Clean Monday in 1929, and the next year, again on Clean Monday, her mother passed away. So little Maria and her 4-year-old brother were left orphaned. This hardship was the first of many in Gerontissa Macrina's life, all of which she accepted with fortitude and patience, and through which the grace of God made her holy. As soon as she saved enough money from working, little Maria gave alms to the church, to her spiritual father, for him to serve 40 liturgies for the souls of her parents. So this almsgiving that she gave, which is a custom in our Orthodox faith, to give alms and have the priest commemorate the souls in the proskymedia and the liturgy, and it benefits souls greatly. On the 40th day of the priest serving these liturgies for her parents, Gerontissa saw a dream, and in the dream she saw her mother, and she asked her, "How are you?" And her mother said, "And ke ki po imasta ni tan kala, ala tora po imaste ini kalitera." And so the mother said, "And where we were was good, but where we are is even better." There were times during the war when little Maria and her brother were literally starving to death. But before her father had died, her father was informed that his death was approaching and that his wife would die the following year. And an angel of the Lord had promised him, though, that the hand of God would guide and protect his children. So he died with peace of soul because he entrusted his children to the help of God. So although it seemed that many times the children would die, that Gerontissa, if you read her book, that she would almost starve to death, God protected them though. For an entire year, for example, edible greens grew outside the home where the little Gerontissa, where Maria lived. And no matter how often they picked them, they grew back at an unnatural, fast rate. And we see from this that sometimes it seems like God has abandoned us. I mean, the children there's points where Gerontissa was starving, that she looked like a skeleton, it says. But God promised that he would take care of these children, and that's what he did. So we need to keep this in mind. Sometimes it seems like God has abandoned us and has turned his back on us, but we need to be patient, and we'll see how much he cares about us at every turn. From a young age, little Maria enjoyed reading the scriptures, the lives of the saints, hymns, the patristic and ascetical writings. And this is what we need to do too. We need to read these kind of books and texts to our children and to our grandchildren from a young age, to help them learn from holy writings, which not only make them wise, that make the children wise from hearing these stories, but they make them virtuous, just like Gerontissa became virtuous, even in her childhood, by reading such things. In the book it says there's a story about how Gerontissa had a dream one time where she saw a very beautiful woman dressed as a nun walking in a beautiful pasture, and she was holding the hand of like a 2 or 3 year old baby boy. And at some point the baby boy started to run away from her, and he was running through the field, and the woman dressed as the nun said, "Maria, catch him, catch him." So she starts trying to catch the baby, and at some point she catches the baby and she picks him up, and she says, because she understands who it is, that it's actually the child Christ and the mother of God, and she says to the baby, "How sweet is Christulis." And the baby goes like this, and he puts his hands on the sides of his face, and he goes, and he blows into her face, and she said that she was filled with grace and fragrance. And so Panagia comes, and she takes a ring, and she puts the ring in her, I don't remember how old, Gerontissa here was like maybe 10, maybe 11, and Panagia comes and she takes a ring, and she puts a ring on Maria's finger, on Gerontissa's finger, and a ring on the baby's finger. And Gerontissa said when she woke up from that dream, and she felt that the ring wasn't there on her hand, that she had lost a sacred heirloom that she had had for many years. That's what it felt like when she woke up and the ring wasn't there. And that story especially made an impact on me because we remember from the life of St. Catherine that she had a similar experience. This is the kind of person Gerontissa Macrina was, and is, and she still lives, just in another realm. So Maria, though a child, had a faithful and ascetical mindset. She fully trusted in God, just as we should do. Once while visiting family in Athens, family friends in Athens, she heard about an illumined elder who was clairvoyant. So είχε το προορατικό χάρισμα. So this elder was staying in Piraeus. So one morning, she made her cross and she set out fasting to find the elder. But she didn't know where he was staying. So she just walked and walked until basically it was getting very late and it started to get dark out. So she decided that she would knock on a door and ask if maybe the person could help direct her to where the elder was staying. And so she knocks on the door, and lo and behold, a monk opens the door and he says, "I've been waiting for you." And it was the monk that she was looking for. So he brought her in, he gave her food, he spoke with her, and he told her a lot of the things that she could expect to see in her life. He prophesied to her, in other words. So we see from this that God takes care of everything. As soon as Gerontissa put her trust in God completely, God took care of her. Another example of the hardships and trials Maria suffered, Gerontissa suffered, was she suffered an unfortunate, very, very difficult, she suffered through a very difficult situation with her own spiritual sisters. So what Gerontissa had these two young ladies that they would always go to church together to their spiritual father in Volo, and they would meet on the way on this path, and they would go together every day to church. So one day Gerontissa goes, and her spiritual sisters don't show up, and she thinks it's odd, but she continues on her way to church, and she sees that they're there, and she finds it stranger, and so she tries to talk to them, and they start to ignore her. So time goes by, and Gerontissa continues to try to figure out what's going on with them, and they continue to ignore her, and they've completely at this point stopped meeting with her on the way to church. So Gerontissa was so upset by this because she couldn't understand what she did wrong, and she was embarrassed to tell their spiritual father. So she waited a while, and finally at some point Gerontissa decided that I'm just going to apologize. So she goes to where they used to meet, and she hides behind a tree, and she waits for them to pass by, and she throws herself before them down on the ground at their feet. She prostrates to them, and she says, "Please, I'm sorry, whatever I've done, please forgive me. I don't understand what I've done." And they say, "Oh, well, you haven't really done anything. It's just that in the beginning we wanted to test you to see if you had patience. And then we just sort of started to get sick of you. And then the thought of you made us sick to our stomachs. And we don't like you." And Gerontissa says, "I don't understand. You've been receiving communion all this time and you've been bearing this grudge against me? And they say, yeah, well, I guess, and they have doesn't matter to them at all. They don't at all see how deathly this situation is, how sinful and how harmful it is. So Gerontissa, who was covered in mud, went back home, and the girls go to church. So the spiritual father inquires what happened and where Maria is. And that's when the girls reveal what they had done, that they have actually stopped speaking with her and that they can't stand her. And the spiritual father gave them a very, very big kanona, and especially because they had been communing. But as far as I know, the relationship was never reconciled. And so we see from this, Gerontissa had done nothing wrong. It wasn't Gerontissa's fault that they stopped speaking with her. And yet what did she do? She went and begged forgiveness. She went and begged forgiveness. This is very important for us to keep in mind. So such was her virtue. She struggled. She confessed her sins all throughout her childhood, from such a young age. She did perfect obedience to her spiritual father. She humbled herself. And with the grace of God, she enjoyed great states of prayer and blessedness. So after working in the world until she was in her late 30s, Maria and some of her spiritual sisters from the world found a place wherein they could live out the monastic life. They contacted Elder Joseph the Hesychist. They had a spiritual father who had actually come from Papua as well. His name was also Ephraim. But at this point, I'm not sure what happened with that Father Ephraim. So anyway, I'm not sure if he had passed away, or I don't know what the situation was. But when they go to become nuns, they wanted Papua Yosef to be their spiritual father. So they write him a letter asking if he'll become their spiritual father and director. So without having met Maria, Gerontissa Macrina, Elder Joseph, he prayed first he writes them a letter back and he says, okay, I will agree to be your spiritual father if you agree to do obedience to me. And they write him back and they say, yes, of course, we'll do obedience to you. So then Papua Yosef, he prays for who should be the abbess at the monastery, that it would please God to direct the spiritual lives of the sisters, the everyday lives of the sisters at the monastery. Now, there were many other nuns or women that were part of this community that were older than Gerontissa. But when Papua prayed, he saw in a vision a pasture where Maria was standing there, and there were sheep all around her. And there was a wild monkey that kept trying to come and bother the sheep. And she had a sort of like a stick, and she was beating off the monkey. And from this, Papua understood that it was God's will for Gerontissa Macrina to become the abbess and to guide the flock. But on account of her great humility, it was very hard for Maria to accept this. Not only because there were older women in the sisterhood, but because she couldn't see that she was worthy of it. So Elder Joseph prayed for God to enlighten her so that she would have confirmation herself from God that this was the will of God. So one night she sees St. John the Prodromo, the forerunner and Baptist, and he's ascending a hill, a mountain really, and he has a staff with him. And she's following behind St. John, and behind her, many monastics are following. And at some point in this journey up the mountain, St. John turns toward Maria, and he hands her the staff. And that's when she understood that it was the will of God for her to guide the flock. And so she accepted the will of God. So as we've seen, her virtues weren't limited to monasticism. She herself tells us that while in the world, she struggled to obey her spiritual father. So even before she became a nun, she taught that obedience to your spiritual father brings the soul joy. It is the cause of constant gratitude. Obedience is a golden life which gives you strength and grace and keeps our consciences clean. This is what she taught. And she tells us this caused her to feel the presence of God, this obedience to her spiritual father. She convinced herself that even while in the world, those around her were like her connovio, they were like her sisterhood, even before she was a nun. And she did obedience to those people. She said doing our own will, what our thoughts tell us, instead of obedience, is one of the greatest downfalls we are able to experience. So another thing that Gerontissa spoke a great deal about was not wasting time. This was a great concern for her. God gave us this time, this is what she taught, that we have in this life to draw closer to him. So we need to safeguard this time. We need to use it wisely. She taught that we need to have order in our lives and in our spiritual lives, especially. So reading the lives of the saints, prayer, reading scripture, these were all things she stressed for us to do. She would say the fathers of the church, the saints, did not have more than we have. They fought the same passions and struggled to live holy lives, just as we should do. With struggle and a good disposition, the fathers arrived at holiness, just as we are able to do. If they were able to succeed, we have no excuses, since if they had the same passions as us, the same temptations, the same afflictions, and yet still were able to struggle and to acquire the grace of God and to conquer their passions and to become holy, what excuse do we have? We don't have anything, we have no more temptation than they did and no less opportunity to receive grace from God. So she would say, even if for only 1 week we were to struggle to, for example, keep silent and pray, she would say, even if only for 1 week, even in this short period of time, we would see the depth of God's love. God's grace visits us when someone upsets us. They say harsh things to us, criticize, or fight with us. If we keep our thoughts humble, even in the midst of these trials, God will visit us with grace. God will change our hearts, hard as stone though they may be. He will make our darkness light, and our cold hearts will burn with love for God. And then when we see the grace of God, we'll say, I'm going to try not to have disdain for anyone in my soul. This is what Gerontissa said. And even to those who hate us and treat us poorly, we will say, this person is a saint in my eyes. And gradually, all the vices in our hearts will flee and God's grace will reign. And this is what Gerontissa actually put into practice. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. We need to also practice it. And by doing it in the little ways, we'll start to have spiritual victories, and then we'll be able to do it in the greater things as well, because it's all with the grace of God and his mercy that we are able to accomplish these things. So Gerontissa not only loved God above all and taught her nuns to love him, but she also loved her neighbor as herself. With pain of heart, she would pray for people, and they would receive great benefit. She once prayed for her friend, a woman who was a teacher in the world. This teacher had decided that it was impossible for God to be Trinity. She couldn't understand this teacher, and she refused to believe how God and Trinity could possibly be one essence, since God is also 3 persons. So Gerontissa, who was very concerned with the state of this woman's soul, who not only believed in heresy, but taught it also in school, since she was a teacher, so Gerontissa prayed very much for her. And one night, through Gerontissa's prayers, the woman, the teacher who was in her home, she saw a vision of 3 angels. And the angels said to her, come and examine us and see if there's any difference between us. So she does. She looks at their hair, their nails, their eyes, everything. From their heads to their toes, she looks at them. She can't find any difference. She says, I'm sorry that there is no difference between you. And they say, now do you believe in one essence? So the woman ran to Gerontissa's house. So this is before Gerontissa became a nun. And she told her the story and began crying and said, you prayed for me. Now I will teach this at school. Such was the strength of Gerontissa's prayers that it was able to change this woman's heretical thoughts. And such was her love that she struggled in prayer in order to win back this woman's soul from heresy, which is death to our soul. So after this experience, the woman became very faithful. And it's all through Gerontissa's prayers. Gerontissa's love and her prayers corrected this woman's wrong belief. And this is a great testimony for us, because prayer works wonders. We should never give up on someone. Pray, 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 and God will enlighten them, because his love and mercy are greater than ours. And he's always looking for an excuse to help someone. We should pray even for those who hate us. Gerontissa tells another story about a woman who slandered her, and the spiritual benefit we can receive from praying for those who hate us and who say false things about us. And the thing was, in this particular situation, Gerontissa, not only was she slandered unjustly, because she didn't do the things the woman was saying she did, more importantly, Gerontissa didn't judge the person who was slandering her. So Gerontissa says what happened was, this woman, she doesn't say what the woman said, but whatever she said was horrible, and Gerontissa said, I prayed neither for my mother nor for my father as much as I prayed for this soul. So one night while she's praying for the woman, she sees a vision. And she sees the woman who slandered her across the way, and she looked extremely exhausted, and she was covered in sweat, and she had 2 big indentations here on account of the tears she was shedding. So the woman is trying to carry this massive stone on her back, and she can't pick it up. And Gerontissa runs to her and asks her if she needs help. And she says, this looks like it's very heavy. And the woman says, it is. But Gerontissa also can't lift it. And the woman says to her, the queen is having a banquet tonight, and she has invited you. And Gerontissa says, the queen's invited me? And all of a sudden, Gerontissa sees a caravan come by, and she says, it was like no automobile or carriage I had ever seen in my life. And in the carriage is Gerontissa Theophono, who is Elder Ephraim of Arizona's mother, but who, she was a nun, I think, under Gerontissa Macrina, but who Gerontissa Macrina considered was her spiritual mother, because even while in the world, she would go to Gerontissa Theophono for spiritual advice, for spiritual companionship. They would pray together. So Gerontissa Macrina says she made her cross and she got into the caravan, and they go along, and she says we pull up into this beautiful street, and there's a beautiful church, and I made my cross as I went by, and across from the church is a beautiful palace. So they get out of the caravan, and Gerontissa goes towards the crowd, and she sees that there's these beautiful big doors of the palace, and standing in the middle is the queen, and of course the queen is the mother of God, it's Panagia. But Gerontissa says, on account of the light of her face, I couldn't see her from the neck up. I could see her beautiful clothes, I could see her beautiful sandals, but I couldn't see her face because it was so bright with the grace of God. So Gerontissa sees in front of the queen, there's 2 lines. There's a line of children, and she says they're dressed like little angels with ribbon and lace. And there's a line of women who she said were widows, but look like, like dressed like nuns, like we see in the old Giadas in Greece, who wear all black and black mandili and black clothes. So Gerontissa goes with the women who look like the nuns. And they say to her, no, you have to wait your turn. So all of a sudden, she hears the hymn, I don't know what I can't think of the Greek, but it's like, come, let us be radiant for the festival. It's what we sing on Pascha. And then the queen starts to say, come, you martyrs, you great martyrs, to the feast. And the children start to line up and come in. They take her blessing, and they're going into the banquet hall in the palace. And then the widows start to come. And so it gets to the point where it's Gerontissa's turn, and she comes up. And she goes to get the blessing of the queen, and the queen gives her the blessing, and she puts her hand on her back, and she says to Gerontissa, Ipomoni, ipomoni, ipomoni. Patience, patience, patience. And then Panagia turns to one of her maids, and she says, take her to the king's garden. But Gerontissa, who was curious about the banquet, stopped to look inside to see. And she said, what I saw were beautiful tables with white tablecloths and food everywhere. Whatever you wanted, it was there. Whatever kind of food you could imagine, it was there. And the chanting continued, come, let us be radiant for the festival. And the maid, who the queen had called on, leans over to Gerontissa and she takes her by the hand and she says, "This is for the martyrs, for those who have suffered." And Gerontissa says, "And I was given to know that patience was needed," i.e. in this tribulation that she was going through. So the maid takes Gerontissa to a garden, a very beautiful garden, a paradisal garden. And she says there were some kind of brown lilies there that looked like lilies that had crosses on them. She said when she went into the garden, such spiritual exaltation filled her soul that all the sorrow that she was feeling from this trial left. And when she awoke from this vision, Gerontissa ran to the woman who had slandered her. And she hugged her and she kissed her and she said, "I don't know how to thank you for the bad things you have said about me." Now, why did Gerontissa say that? Because she saw that from not judging the woman, from not only suffering the horrible things the woman and false things the woman said about her, Gerontissa didn't judge her. And she said, "From then on, I knew that I would never judge anyone again. Even if I saw them commit a sin in front of me, I wouldn't believe it," she said. And so, agapitemu, adelphi, my brothers and sisters, St. Paul says, "Let us fear then, lest perhaps, being left a promise to enter into his rest, any of you, any of us, seems to have come short of it, since, like Gerontissa, we have every means to become holy, because not only do we have the great Orthodox faith, we have amazing examples like the monastics who, through their struggles, show us not only the light of Christ that dwells within them, but how we too can acquire this light." So what excuse will we give on the judgment day if we too don't reach holiness? What will we say? We'll have no words. We will stand in silence, filled with shame, because the medicine, tochapi, holiness, is always there for us to take. God offers this medicine of holiness, which is showing patience in tribulations, which is keeping the faith, which is praying and loving those who hate us, and just basic struggle, confession and fasting. This is the medicine that God provides for all Orthodox Christians to become saints. So if we don't swallow this medicine, if we don't pick up our own crosses that God has given to us in order for us to be sanctified, because each of us have our own particular way in which we'll be sanctified, our own particular struggles to fight through and to conquer, if we don't follow Christ, if we don't deny ourselves, if we don't struggle, in other words, what excuse will we give? Woe to us if we don't make a spiritual effort. Woe to us if we leave the acquisition of holiness up to people like Gerontissa Macrina and Yerunda Ephraim, because it isn't just for them, it's for all of us. All we need to do is give one, is make a little effort, and God gives 100. So maybe then, through the prayers of the holy Gerontissa Macrina, through Yerunda Ephraim, through all the fathers, through all the mothers, through the monastics that struggle, may we arrive at holiness even here in the world. Thanks.
Take an opportunity to maybe ask her a question or two. It would be very beneficial for all of us. Since you're too shy, I'll ask the first question. Presbytera, what would you suggest Gerontissa Macrina would say to us for our struggling families, especially where we don't love our mother-in-laws and father-in-laws and all that kind of stuff? What would Gerontissa Macrina say about that?
Well, I'll say what Gerontissa Macrina's, one of her disciples, said to me when I asked, what would you say to people struggling in the world? And she said two things. She said that that we need to have a very close relationship with our spiritual father. We need to confess. as families, we need to pray together. Every day we need to pray. And she also said that it's very important as parents, as grandparents, to try not to control our children, but to take them to spiritual father so that the spiritual father can give guidance. And that way they grow properly, because sometimes, you know, we with our own passions, we want to guide them in this direction, but maybe God wants them to go in a different direction. So our children aren't our belongings, they're entrusted to us, and we're expected to raise them in holiness and in the fear of God and in the love of God. So this is why we need to have a close relationship with our spiritual fathers and to pray, because as we saw in Gerontissa's life, it was prayer that she was able to accomplish all things. All through her tribulations, it was prayer, and it was the grace of God and the mercy that she acquired through her prayer.
Anyone else would ask a question for Presbytera? Well, Presbytera's book is available here, The Scent of Holiness, and God willing, she's going to publish a second book with all of our prayers. So I encourage you to read this book. It's an excellent book, not just for women, because some might have been thinking, you know, we have a men's monastery here, we're talking about women, but as the gospel says, there's neither male or female, but we're all one in Christ. So I encourage you to read this book from Presbytera on her website, her blog, and to communicate with her. Presbytera, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you.